Strange tales told by a Dubliner, be Turlough con me. Story number 13. Thy Father's Spirit. When I was a boy, I used to hear stories and songs, but not from me mother, as you might imagine. No, it was from me father. I don't know what it was about me mother. She must have known stories and songs, but I have a feeling that, because she was a woman, she didn't take herself and her knowledge seriously enough. She did tell the story of the Banshee of the Craigs, and other things about her family in Northern Ireland, but I didn't understand enough to appreciate their significance. I do remember her sitting at the fireside, drinking tea. She read the teacups and foretold our future to us kids. That is, she would foretell what would happen shortly, relying on the pictures made by the tea leaves left at the bottom of the cup once the tea was drunk. But even then she didn't take herself seriously. She said it was just for a laugh. She told us that there were people who really did read the cups and have the second sight. She told us of a man who had the gift. One time at a social occasion, he was given a cup to read by a woman. After looking at it, he grew very pale. "I'll not read that cup," was all he would say. A few weeks later, the woman was dead. Anyway, my father was the teller of tales and singer of songs. At night when I had been put to bed, he would often come up to the room and entertain me for a while. What did he have to offer? It all seems so long ago, and yet I hear his voice as if it was yesterday. First of all, I remember the songs he would sing. They were a clue to his world, the world he had grown up in, for he was born in 1918. He sang songs from the First World War. His favourite was "The Old Kit Bag," and he sang that to me. "Bag up your troubles in your old kit bag and smile, smile, smile. If you've a lucifer to light your fag, smile, boys, that's the style. What's the use of worrying? It never was worthwhile. So pack up your troubles in your old kit bag and smile, smile, smile." He somehow had scraps of folk memory about the First World War, though it had ended a few weeks before he was born. He talked to life in the trenches. He also told me, he being a smoker of cigarettes, about the third man on a match being unlucky. It seems that when a smoker shared a match, or a lucifer, to help other smokers light their cigarettes, it was considered unlucky to be the third one to light his from the same match. The reason for this, me father explained, was that in the trenches, if 3 soldiers stood smoking, by the time the third man had lit up, there was enough time for the German sniper across no man's land to get a bead on him and shoot him down. He also had stories about the War of Independence in Dublin. He talked about the Easter Rising that started it all. He told of James Connolly and Countess Markievicz. He talked about Michael Collins, who travelled around Dublin on a bicycle in broad daylight because no one on the other side knew what he looked like. He talked of his father being a nationalist and how he hid his brother-in-law, a gunman, in the attic for several weeks after Bloody Sunday in 1920. In fact, One night of that year, when my father was only 2 years old, the British raided the house. While they searched the place from top to bottom, his mother tried to keep him calm, by taking him into her bed and singing him a song. He even knew what the song was. It was "I'm Forever Blowing Bubbles," a hit music hall song at the time.
I'm forever blowing bubbles, pretty bubbles in the air. They fly so high, nearly reach the sky. Then, like my dreams, they fade and die.
He also remembered the Great Depression, and as a young man he had read The Grapes of Wrath by Steinbeck, which made a great impression on him. He used to sing several songs from the Depression. One I remember was One Meatball. The old man walked up and down to find an eating place in town. He took the menu through and through to see what 15 cents could do. One meatball, one meatball. He could afford but one meatball. The old man felt very sad. One meatball was all he had, and in his dreams he hears that call. You get no bread with one meatball. One meatball, that's all you get now. One meatball, and no spaghetti. You get no bread with one meatball. That was his world. Those were the events that had shaped him as a child. The First World War, the War of Independence, the Depression. Later on, as a young man, like many of his generation, he was passionately affected by the Spanish Civil War, but I was too young to hear about that. During the Second World War, Ireland was neutral, but my father witnessed the accidental bombing of the North Strand by an off-course German plane in 1942. He certainly remembered rationing. There was a song about it, a version of a music hall song. Bless 'em all, bless 'em all, bless the long and the short and the tall. Bless Devil Lira and Sean McEntee for giving us brown bread and a half ounce of tea. Bless 'em all, bless 'em all. Of course, he told me all the stories about Dublin that I remember now, such as the headless ghost of Dead Man Murray's. And he sang the song The Spanish Lady, which was oddly eerie and which he didn't understand himself, though I often asked him to explain it. But an account of me father's entertaining would not be complete without a mention of the Shakespearean stage. My father was an amateur actor, just like his father before him. When I was older, he took me to the theatre, and I also saw him tread the boards myself. But now, when I was still very young, it was all a matter of Hamlet. The dad loved Hamlet, and though he was an amateur thespian, I doubt if he ever got to play the Dane, but he familiarised me with the story, and he could recite many of the speeches. In fact, I remember his springy step upon the creaking stair, and then he would come into the darkened room, framed in the doorway, and say, "Hamlet, I am thy father's spirit." At this point the darkened bedroom would expand into a stage, and he would recite speeches from Hamlet. To be or not to be was obviously the best known. To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them. To die, to sleep, no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to, 'tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. To die, to sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come must give us pause. I used to like another speech he knew because of its vituperation, which he recited with great gusto. It was the soliloquy about the players. Oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I! Is it not monstrous that this player here, but in a fiction, in a dream of passion, could force his soul so to his own conceit, that from her working all his visage wand, tears in his eyes, distraction in his aspect, a broken voice, and his whole function suiting with forms to his conceit? And all for nothing, for Hecuba. What's Hecuba to him, or he to Hecuba, that he should weep for her? What would he do, had he the motive and the cue for passion that I have? He would drown the stage with tears, and cleave the general ear with horrid speech, make mad the guilty and appall the free, confound the ignorant, and amaze indeed the very faculties of eyes and ears. I remember him doing the scene with the gravediggers as well. Holding an imaginary skull in his hand, he would say, "Alas, poor Yorick! I knew him, Horatio. A fellow of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy. He hath borne me on his back 1,000 times. And now, how abhorred in my imagination it is! My gorge rims at it. Here hung those lips that I have kissed I know not how oft. Where be your jibes now, your gambols, your songs, your flashes of merriment that were wont to set the table on a roar?" Meanwhile the stage had expanded further, and as the Dar recited, he seemed to be surrounded by the players, or by the gravediggers. When he had done enough, he would say, "The rest is silence." Then he would come over and kiss me on the forehead, say, "Good night, sweet prince," and be gone. Now it is All Souls' Eve, and I wait alone at home. For this is the night when the spirits of the departed revisit their old houses and their descendants. The night when our ghosts come back to haunt us. I'm looking at the pictures on the wall, including an old photo of the Da. Then there's one of me grandfather, and the grandmother I never knew, for she died before I was born. And then there's one of Uncle Louis, me mother's brother, a man of music as all the Craigs were. He is seated at the piano, as seems only fitting. I'm used to the feelings of guilt I have now when I look at them photographs, especially on All Souls' Night, when I expect the ghosts to come and visit, and don't feel very confident about receiving them. Uncle Louis, to whom I owe so much. As one of the musical Craigs, he initiated me into the world of music. Did I value this enough? No. Did I thank him enough for it? No. Did I tell him how important he was to me? No. And yet now, as a much older man, I recognise a simple fact. I was the son that he, the unmarried man, had never had. When he comes into the circle of candlelight, all I can say to him is, "Forgive me." The Da is an even more difficult case, because I don't know what to say to him when he appears in the circle. I want to thank him for what he gave me on them nights as a child going to sleep. Yet, later on, things became strained between us. That remained so all our lives. When he died, I was left with the inescapable feeling that I was a disappointment to him. Yet that does not make me feel guilty. I want to say to him, "How dare you be disappointed in me? The trouble is you didn't really love me. I was like many sons, a kind of ego project for you, an exercise in self-reproduction." I want to say to him, "If you really loved me, you would have loved me in spite of your disappointment in me." And if at that point he were to shoot back, as well he might, "Did you love me?" I would have to say, "No, not enough, and I'm sorry." And wouldn't you know it, he does come back on this night of nights. I've left the door into the outer hallway opened wide. A figure appears in the frame of the doorway, dark and massive. Because he's outside the circle of candlelight still, I can't see who it is. But I know. Who else could it be, knowing his theatrical entrances? "Hamlet," he says, "I am thy father's spirit, doomed for a certain term to walk the night, and for the day confined to fast in fires, till the foul crimes done in my days of nature are burnt and purged away. But that I am forbid to tell the secrets of my prison house, I could a tale unfold, whose lightest word would harrow up thy soul, freeze thy young blood, make thy two eyes, like stars, start from their spheres, thy knotted and combined locks to part, and each particular hair to stand on end, like quills upon the fretful porpentine." Good God, I say, is purgatory that bad? "It is," he says, stepping into the circle. "I know now all I did wrong, all me foolish mistakes, including me mistakes with you. They come before me always. They are the flames that burn." "So why have you come back?" "To see how the world goes on," he replies carelessly, but there's a sadness in it. I say, "I know you get compassionate leave on this night to revisit the earth, but why here? And why me?" "Isn't it obvious?" "Why?" "Because you're the problem." He turns around and makes a lifting gesture with both hands to an invisible stage manager. The door and the walls of where I live, and am sitting at a table with a candle on it, disappear up into the darkness, into the flies, with a kind of whoosh. Now we're on an empty stage. I'm seated at me table close to the wings, stage right. He, as always, is centre stage. This stage is otherwise dark and bare. No props, except for me table and chair. No shadowy actors waiting in the wings to walk on when they hear their cue. This is a one-man show. I turn me head and look out into the theatre. Is there an audience there? But no, I was mistaken. There are no faces of spectators in the parterre, no murmur of anticipation as the curtain goes up, just empty rows of seats. "What does it all mean?" I ask him. "Why are we back in the theatre?" "The play's the thing," he says. "You always came and said, 'Hamlet, I am thy father's spirit,' and that was a macabre joke. Only this time you're playing it for tears, not for laughs. There's plenty to weep for, and not just Hecuba. All along, you did your best, and it wasn't enough for me. And I did what I did, and it obviously wasn't enough for you. In the end, there was no love between us. It ends like Hamlet, I suppose. A stage littered with corpses, some of them stabbed in the heart, some of them poisoned. The rest is silence. The people in me life, like you, they gave so much and got no return in the end. I haven't got much return either. That's all water under the bridge, he says glumly. Do you know what you did for me as King Hamlet's ghost, with your stories and your songs? Have you any idea how much it meant? He smiles a little and shrugs his shoulders. No, he says, I look back on me life and see all the mistakes. I don't see meaning in much of it. Well, it did have meaning. It meant everything to me. It made me who I am. It shaped me. It nurtured me. Just because you were who you were, and I was who I was, your little son. It was good while it lasted, he says with a sigh. Aye, things like that can't last, because little boys grow up and break away from their fathers. And in our case, love, or whatever it had been, was replaced by rivalry, enmity, and mutual misunderstanding. You went away to places I couldn't follow you. Just as well. Fathers and sons need to be apart. At least many do. We certainly did. Whenever we did meet, it struck sparks, that was all. More heat than light. You brought your little daughter with you then. That was a good thing. Aye, I haven't forgotten the tears in your eyes at the departure gate. I hope you were a better father to her than I was to you. I don't know, but I'm just realising this, and I never realised it before. In me life with her, I was you. I exactly repeated the pattern that you had laid out for me. I, her father, was the one who sang songs and told stories. At nights when she went to sleep, nothing would do her but for me to come and sit with her and give her an endless supply of songs and stories, until she would finally consent to go asleep. Fairy tales, Greek myths, Irish sagas, Dublin stories, all about the War of Independence, your stories and songs, and of course, Shakespeare plays. Did you sing the same songs and tell the same stories? He asks almost eagerly. That I did, says I, the very same ones, and plenty more. There's no end to stories and songs, as you know. One seems to beg another. I still think of stories I should have been sure to tell her and didn't. But it all has to end sometime. They grow up. Aye, indeed they do, he says, and looks at me. So it has to be. And then the curtain falls, and it's as if it had never been. Why do we do it? All for Hecuba. For love, I insist. And what is love? He asks of no one in particular. I wish I knew. I thought I did know once. Now I'm not so sure. Neither am I say. But let me tell you what I have learned from life. There is love between the generations. We can't help it when they arrive in our laps as helpless infants. Oh yes, there's the love expressed in feeding and clothing and housing them. But there's also what I might call a surplus love. A love that's left over when all the everyday business of loving children is done. Perhaps fathers in particular have this surplus love, and it is expressed in words, in stories and songs. It was true for me and you. It was true for me and me daughter. So, there you are now. Begod, says the Da, if it's love, I must say it's a love that disappears like snow off a ditch. A few years go by, they're older, and they're off on their own and forgotten you. Where's the love then? In the child or the man? Does it just die? It comes when it's needed, and it's there for as long as it's needed. We think of love as something personal, something intense between two persons, and I suppose that's true. But this love is also impersonal. It serves a purpose to human society, just like the love of man and woman serves the purpose of carrying on the human race. Don't you see? It's the stories and the songs that count, not us. Not the father, not the child. We are just the vehicles for transmitting it. To a father, telling stories is a kind of education imparted. To a child, stories told mean love. But neither of them see the truth of the matter. The songs and the stories transmit themselves from one generation to the next, under the guise of love. So that's all it was. All for Hecuba. I see his disappointment. Don't make too little of it, I urge him. That is the way of the world, the way of humankind. From generation to generation, knowledge, lore, and what have you, are transmitted from father to son, and from mother to daughter. It's that way because the son is learning what it's like to be a man, and the daughter is learning what it's like to be a woman. The lessons are wrapped up with that unspoken knowledge about the child's future, just like the unspoken knowledge of a trade or craft, of weaving or blacksmithing, of sewing and lace work. The likes of you, Da, has no trade or craft to impart. It's all in the words of songs and stories. They mean much more than they say. Well, I had a son, but you had no son. No, but I had a daughter. If a man has no son, what is he to do with all his lore? It'll just stay with him. But what if he has a daughter instead? He'll give it to her. Look, I said, with a sudden realization, if you want to understand how much you have shaped her as well as me, and how your lore has been passed on to her through me, that is how. She is not so much my daughter as me honorary son. The whole sorry business. God forgive me for me influence on more than one generation. I only hope it was for the good. I fear to have passed on into myself that was bad. Somehow I dare to think the good balances out the bad. But what a piece of work is man. There never is good without bad. I suppose that accounts for it. So where does that leave us? Acknowledging each other. I made mistakes, and I suppose so have you in your time. Oh yes, you can be bloody sure of that. But in the end, I did the best job I could of passing on all that stuff about Dublin and the wars of me century and the stage and Shakespeare. It was up to you to try to make sense of it all. And you did, it seems. You passed it on to your daughter. I did the best job I could of passing it on to me daughter. It's up to her now what she makes of it. I'm glad that I live on in memory. No, that all that lives on in memory. It does, on and on. When we've taken our last bows front of stage and made our exit into the wings for good. That's all we can hope for. Time will go on, and generation will follow generation, and the stories will change, losing some details and getting other new ones, and the songs will change, losing some notes of their melody and getting new ones, losing verses and getting new ones, and there's not a good goddamn any of us can do about it. I have received the homage of your words tonight, the only homage I know you can give. Yet I'm consoled by the talk we've had. I'm consoled to be remembered, and for me words and voice to be transmitted onwards through you. I know it is not me, just the songs and the stories that matter. Yet the words and the voice go on too, I say to him, and I know this is really all I can give. Your voice and your words, they've become my own. We look at one another, he the armoured ghost, I the dark-suited prince at the table, with the candle gutted in its sconce. That's all I have to say to you this time, I tell him. The rest is silence. He comes to the front of the stage and bows to an invisible audience. Then he turns to me and says, I will not say, good night, sweet prince, for that would be too bitter a farewell for both of us. There's not much love in it this time, we both know. Not the love that once was. Instead, I will just say, adieu, adieu, Hamlet. Remember me. He turns and walks across the stage, the floorboards creaking slightly under his springy tread. Or do I just imagine it? He exits stage left. Remember thee, I say. Aye, thou poor ghost, while memory holds a seat in this distracted globe. Remember thee? Yea, from the table of my memory I'll wipe away all trivial fond records, all saws of books, all forms, all pressures past, that youth and observation copied there. And thy commandment all alone shall live within the book and volume of my brain, unmixed with baser matter. I rise from me table, taking me candle, and looking out one last time into the empty parterre. Then I exit stage right. I hear the rustle of a curtain falling, and All Souls' Night is done for another year. You have been listening to Thy Father's Spirit Be Turloch on Me from Strange Tales Told by a Dubliner. If you've enjoyed the series, don't forget to like, subscribe, share and comment. And so, good luck to you.